traditionally, Monza sees the first round of the European Touring Car Championship. Last year, of course, it was the first round of the World Touring Car Championship. Now, sadly, no more. But here, one of the problems that we have is that it's early in the season, and a number of cars that were expected haven't arrived. The reasons are fairly plain. The Ford strike a few weeks ago resulted in a number of bits and pieces required, like new rear axles and things for the Sierras, not being available. Thus, the field's a bit depleted, but don't forget that as the season wears on, with the next round at Donington coming up, we're going to have more Fords. We're also going to be having Toyota in, and, of course, the challenge from Nissan from Japan, which everybody's looking forward to. And that's how I saw the start of the 1988 European Touring Car Championship season at Monza. Rudy Eggenberger knew it was going to be a hard one and demonstrated to one of the new mechanics in the team just how to go about changing a wheel. Follow the master. It's meticulous preparation like this that has made Eggenberger the man to beat in the European Touring Car Championship. Not just of the cars, but of the supporting team. And the drivers well under control. Once again for 88, Klaus Ludwig, Klaus Niedwitz, Steve Soper and Pierre Dodonne, the main quartet. Brancatelli is also to drive from time to time when one or two drivers are engaged in the German Championship. And for this race only, Armin Hahner joins the team as Ludwig can't get back from Sebring. What's different about the car? Steve Soper.
Well, not a great deal. I suppose it's slightly technically more advanced. It's probably not any faster. The electronics are... There's been a lot more development on the electronic side. The engine and everything works better. The power comes in a lot lower. There's less lag on the turbo side. Generally, the car feels and drives far nicer than it did before.
Roberto, Emanuele, driving together again. How long now have you two been paired together? Because it's coming up for the third season.
Yes, I think we start in 1984. No,
85.
85, yes.
Much different about
Yeah, Monza.
Much different about the car this year?
Not really. We've got narrow tyres because of the rules, so we're a bit penalised. But the car is pretty the same. Bit, new bits like new front suspension, but it's the same. Virtually the same.
It's a little bit more difficult to drive because now we have the tyres with 9H, and last year we drove with 10H, and this is not a good advantage for us.
The views of Roberto Ravaglia, the one and only World Touring Car Champion, with that series coming to an end, of course. The burning question at Monza was, would the speed of the Sierras prove to be the obstacle for anybody else to take away their victory during the course of the season? If they could win outright every time and make quite sure that the same driver did it, then all could go right for them. Soper starts in the number 2 car, and the number 1 car, it's Klaus Niedwitz. And right from that start, it's a fierce battle between the BMWs behind. The Fords go out in front, and behind them, that fighting that's going on sees the Bigazzi cars, with cars numbers 52 and 51, in the hands of Olivier Briard and Britain's Mark Thatcher from time to time as well, ably supported by Winnie Vogt and, of course, the brilliant Jacques Lafitte, fighting it out with the Work Schnitzer cars. That was the way it went all day at Monza. The BMW fight taking place behind the Fords. The Ford battle itself was interesting. Soper was anxious to stamp his mark upon the team from the word go. And certainly, from the way that he set off at Monza, there was very little chance that anybody was going to challenge him. Niedwitz, in the end, just couldn't cope. He was a bit harder on the car, and although he stayed with Soper, it was a gradually losing battle. Meanwhile, the BMWs continued to fight it out. But try as they might, there was nothing really they could do about the Ford opposition up ahead. A Class 2 win, or a Division 2 win, was what they were looking for, and keeping it, of course, to the Ravaglia Pirro car. The Sierra Turbo at 2,791cc with turbocharger, 440 to 480 horsepower, 5-speed box, 17-inch by 9-inch wheels, and brakes 13 by 12, weighing in at 1095 kilograms. Soon, Soper pulled away, a tyre problem slowing car number 1. Niedwitz had the misfortune to burst one out on the circuit, and thus it meant a long climb back for Klaus Niedwitz and car number 1 through the field. Supra, meanwhile, was really getting out ahead and doing everything that was expected of it, while the BMWs were tripping over each other, much to the detriment of, believe it or not, Pirro, who fell back behind the group. And this was to prove significant at this first race, with the Bugatti cars, particularly number 52 in Griard hands, proving to be the fastest. Pit stop time, and the Belgian to take over, Pierre Dieudonné, at 42 years old, possibly the gentlest driver in the team. His main strength is that once setting a pace, he can stay with it, and also he'll listen to team orders. And as far as Eggenberger was concerned, this was an important position right from the word go this season. So it was decided that the Supra car, if it held together, would win. And Armin Hahne had the job of taking over from Niedwitz to pull the number 1 car back up the field, which he did, incidentally, brilliantly. As the race wore on, Griard was very much in charge as far as the number 52 Group 2 BMW battle was concerned. He put a tremendous distance between himself and the works car. And as far as Ravaglia was concerned, there was nothing he could do to catch the Belgian. He was going to have to be satisfied with 3rd place in the class, with Vinnie Vogt putting in a brilliant run too, and Mark Thatcher taking over and doing a similar thing. And the real sparkle in this race at Monza came from the fight back by Armin Hahne in this one-off drive. He began to eat into the lead, perhaps, of Dieudonné, but at no time was the leader in any serious difficulty. As far as Hahne was concerned, it was interesting for him to compare this car with the Worth car that he was to drive himself during the course of a number of ETC rounds. No doubt, therefore, about the victor at Monza. Out went the flag, and a win for Supra and Dieudonné in round 1 of the 1988 ETC. Their win from Niedwitz and Hahne, Griard and Lafitte, Thatcher and Vogt, Muller and Schmidlin with the Toyota, and Van der Poel and Ravaglia set the pattern at the end of that first race for a Ford BMW battle, as the presentation took place and the teams gathered themselves together for the next round of the championship at Donington Park. The Donington weather has often played a part in the result of the ETC round here, and also the circuit, which is very hard indeed on brakes. Surprisingly, perhaps, on one hand, it was here that Nissan chose to make their debut. On the other hand, it was close to their home base. Armin Hahne was back again with Jeff Allen as partner in the Worth car number 4. Now manufacturing in Europe, Nissan had chosen Donington for the debut of their new GT car, the Nissan GT-R. They've got big ideas as far as European motorsport is concerned to repeat some of the success that they've had in Australia. And they've got a British team headed by Hard Marsden, who told us all about it.
I'm terribly pleased with the crew of chaps that I brought in from the British motorsport area. Alan Grice, of course, I need not talk about Alan, and he and Wyn Percy work terribly well together. The product that Japan's given us is excellent. The whole thing's coming together. All my job is to pull it together and to take the blame when it goes wrong. It's a very easy job.
Alan, a new car, its first race. You must have some high hopes.
Well, a new car, a new team, a new workshop, new components, absolutely everything brand new. And working up to today, it's been amazing how trouble-free it's been. But if we can finish the race today, we'll be in the half dozen and we'll be very, very happy.
If Klaus Ludwig had missed the bus to Monza, not literally speaking, he certainly didn't miss it at Donington and was determined to put his stamp on the Eggenberger team. Armin Hahne was equally determined to try and push his way in among the two Eggenberger Fords, and watched by Gerald Lascelles and Wyn Percy, off they went for the Donington 500 kilometres, with the Ford starting from the front row and the BMWs tucked in behind. Armin Hahne straight up to second place, and a tremendous start by the Nissan as well. 3 Fords, the Nissan and the BMWs. And the big wonder here was whether or not, perhaps, the BMWs on this circuit might be a lot more competitive than they'd been at Monza. The answer was virtually shown, however, within a few laps. The two Eggenberger Fords and the Worth Ford were fighting it out, and at a respectable distance behind was the Nissan. Eventually, Armin Hahne was disposed of by Steve Soper, oh so anxious to win on his own home ground. Through, up and past Soper, and chasing off now after Ludwig with the car a bit sideways there on a damp track, Soper was anxious to prove that he was going to be the man to beat and establish his position not with one but 2 wins behind him for favour in the Ford camp as far as the rest of the season was concerned. Ludwig had ideas of a totally different nature. In car with Ellen Law for the first time in a Werkschnitzer BMW. Her race was to prove a pretty short one. As Soper set off to try and catch up with Ludwig, the BMWs behind were still fighting it out, but Ludwig was going to take some catching. Contrast the performance of the Eggenberger cars with Graham Good's Listerine car, a front-runner in the British Championship, in and among the BMWs. That's to improve, no doubt, as the season goes on and we see them all together again, perhaps at the Tourist Trophy. The BMWs were still running with 5-speed boxes here at Donington. The 6-speed box, the extra little bit of power and the change in the aerodynamics had not yet played its part in their improvement. But still the Fords were significantly quicker, and Soper was determined to prove that he was the quicker of the 2 into the bargain. Having got ahead of Ludwig, they swapped places for a while. 22 years old Ellen Law in the Werkschnitzer BMW gets pushed off by Muller's Toyota into the sand trap, and this of course brought out the first pace car situation of the season. Redgate is always a dangerous place to leave a car. So the pace slowed for a while Ellen's car was retrieved to take no further part in the proceedings. Soon it was pit stop time, and everything at this stage going according to plan. Steve Soper's car had slowed a little with a minor trouble, but was soon in for its normal pit stop, and the 2 of them set out after the new leader, which was the Nissan, not so far behind at this stage. They began to eat into the Japanese car's lead, who'd stood out longer than them and hadn't had the early pit stop. Grice was thoroughly enjoying himself, trying to keep distance between himself and the Fords. Eventually, they caught up. In and among the traffic, they weaved their way, gradually closing in on the Nissan challenge. By, on the straight, at least 1 Ford, eventually. But this had really stretched the Fords for the first time, and everyone now was beginning to question whether or not their reliability would go with their speed throughout the season. Soper was back in the lead, but as far as Klaus Ludwig was concerned, it was a pretty short race. The Della Camara Toyota spins off, and just after he did so, Ludwig pulled off. Ford's down to 1 effective car, Armin Hahne's car being an early retirement. And that situation too was to change, as in for an unexpected stop came Steve Soper. It didn't seem too significant at this time, and Dodone waited patiently for his chance to take over as Soper rejoined the race. The Nissan thundered on out front. Its first pit stop, not perhaps quite as sharp as the Eggenberger cars as Win Percy is strapped in and takes over, but nevertheless the car in with a big chance of success on its first time out. But Donington is a tough circuit on brakes, and the BMWs, whatever they're not, are not under-braked. Soon they were eating into the lead of the Nissan. The Skyline GTSR has slippery aerodynamics, a twin-cam 24-valve 2-litre turbocharged engine, computer-controlled fuel injection and 450 brake horsepower in race trim. Its problem is its weight. It goes well, but takes some stopping. And as Steve Soper pulled off with the surviving Eggenberger Ford, it was a battle now between Nissan and BMW. The Nissan was running short of brakes, just as Jaguar had a few years before in Percy's hands. And poor Win just couldn't hang on for very much longer. This was the second of 2 spins, by which time he virtually had no brakes at all. A burst of flame as the cars restarted, and heading for the pits is Win Percy, after what nearly turned out to be a dream debut for Nissan. A strong challenge, however, to Ford at this stage of the season, and one that was making everyone sit up and take notice. With the demise of the Nissan into the pits and the demise of the Eggenberger Fords as well, it was a BMW battle on our hands. Howard Marsden was looking worried, and there was no doubt that the car was soon going to be sent out again, but if no improvement was to be pushed away. Out on the track, the Bigazzi BMWs and the Schnitzer BMWs fought it out, with Jolly Jacques Lafitte chasing after Ravaglia for all he was worth at one stage. Ravaglia did not win the World Touring Car Championship in 1987 by not being pretty quick and pretty wise. Donington was to prove to be a BMW walkover, as the Nissan was pushed away to live to fight another day. Eggenbergers had packed up and they were just spectators as well, and the BMW Finance with mobile cars from Britain were also picking up the challenge as well, as the BMWs headed towards victory, fighting it out among themselves. Lafitte almost got second place, but towards the end of the race, number 52 finally gave way under the pressure, and the unlucky Frenchman was out. Thus, Roberto Ravaglia went on to victory at Donington, and it was a fine drive too, with a delighted team and Peter Floor, at that time happy with BMW, watching the action as, going over the curb on the last lap, Roberto took the flag. BMWs well and truly to the fore. Ravaglia pole, Sidner, Smith and Weaver, Smith and Hoy, Dijon and Crabb, Martin and Thatcher, Vanacek and Tomacek, the top six for the Munich cars. After spraying us all with champagne, Roberto told us how he did it.
I think we did a very good race, and Eric, and also the team. I think we had problem in the beginning of the practice Friday, and now yesterday we found out the solution. The car was okay. I think we had a little bit luck because the Ford are quicker. But I think at the end of the day, I think we are very happy to win, because also it's the first time after 5 years that in my career that I win in England. This is the first time. And,
well, this is marvellous. Your first victory
yes.
in England. For round 3 in Portugal, the Nissan wasn't there, but Armin Hana was giving it another crack against the all-conquering Eggenberger Fords, other than at Donington. But another man, too, was hoping that the Maserati, which had been held up in the British docks, could be the car to watch during the course of the year. After Armin Hana's disasters in 1987, you'd have thought no one would bother. But on paper, this could be a very competitive car. The bi-turbo Maserati has certainly got the right pedigree. 3.5 litres with its turbocharger, V6, 425 brake horsepower, the right tyre size, the right brakes, but perhaps a little on the heavy side. We asked driver Thomas Lindstrom why, therefore, he had picked the Maserati Challenge to take up when he'd driven so successfully in well-tried cars before, like the Volvo, for example.
I think a big advantage in the engine, when you can find the right setting for the engine with you can for sure produce more horsepower than the Ford. And I also think that the handling can be better than the Ford.
Well, Alfred Hager, for one, perhaps wouldn't agree. And Eric van der Poel finds times to shake hands as Ellen Law practices a quick driver change with the veteran of the team, Dieter Cuesta. Dieter we don't see as often as we'd like to. He's still a quick driver, and he's got a tremendous sense of humour. Armin Hana, again, was as quick as anybody when it came to driving round the Portuguese circuit. He proved it by getting in pole position, even if he doesn't have the latest in radio control wear, much to the amusement of the Eggenberger guys. Nevertheless, this looks set to be a really good fight, as Ludwig offers some probably unnecessary advice. Klaus Niedewitz found time to practice his English before the start. What that was going to do in the race, only he alone knew. And here, the camera car again, we were hoping would go a bit further this time, and certainly at the start, Armin Hana provided all the fireworks anybody needed. He was out there once again ahead of the Eggenberger boys, leaving them to snap at his tail. And snap they did, with BMWs right up with them as well in the early stages of the race. There were some pretty close encounters of the other kind as Winnie Vogt came through on the inside there of one of the less quick BMs. Meanwhile, it was really hard out front there and some very tough driving was going on. Eventually, Eggenberger cars were really fighting it out with Harama, something the crowd had paid to see. But Niedewitz had something to prove, that he was the quickest, and set about getting past his fellow countrymen. It didn't take him long, and soon it was the usual pattern, with Eggenbergers forcing their way to the front. Harama was not anxious to give way too quickly to the mass of Eggenbergers behind him and in front of him. He was trying to get that lead back. At this stage, the three Fords seemed to be fairly evenly matched, while the BMWs weren't falling that far behind. Here in Portugal, it looked as if we could have a 5 or 6 or 7 car battle at this stage of the contest. Sauber by now was beginning to plan his races a little. He was disappointed at the Donington result and was beginning to persuade Rudi Eggenberger that he should take over second in the car and not start off, giving him perhaps the choice of which car he drove according to its position as the leading Eggenberger man in the championship, while Niedewitz was anxious to put himself and Ludwig in front, of course, of the British driver, thus maintaining the German's ascendancy within the team. This was the pattern of the race here in Portugal. At this stage, Pierre Dieudonné was still fighting it out with Armin Hanna, letting Niedewitz get away out in front, and didn't seem to be able to find a way by any too easily. Eventually, he did it, and the question now was, could he close on the leader? Hanna's car began to slow. Once again, it was an early bath for the Worth team. Headlights ablaze, however, Klaus Niedewitz had no intention of being caught. He maintained his lead and hoped that the pit stop would go well. The BMW battle was quite an exciting one, but Ravaglia's car was well up there at the front. BMWs too played the driver game. They'd done it going right back to Monza, with Ravaglia choosing which car to take over, dependent upon where it was placed. But here, having won at Donington, they really felt they had a chance of a second victory. Eric van der Poel is lapped by the leading car. Notice how the BMW is able to stay with the Ford round the corners. It's only in a straight line that the Cosworth car tells and he's able to steam away. They could hardly wait to get their 6-speed gearboxes, which they thought was going to give them a significant advantage. Pit stop time, and Charlie Lamb presides, and Roberto's decision is made. Which car he's going to take over. In comes number 57, and as predicted, it is Roberto who's in the driving seat. Cooling suits to help with the comfort of the driver inside the Fords. Klaus Ludwig now prepares to take over from Niedewitz with the leading car, as out into the race goes Ravaglia. But in first comes Dieudonné. The car is not 100% healthy. They have an oil cooler problem, which requires some quick work. But the interesting factor is that Ludwig is taking over. The pattern is set for the season. Sauber is to go for the ETCC, Ludwig is to go for the German championship. And the smoke is the exit of the Toyota from the race as the camera car goes through. A disconsolate driver gives up as in comes car number 1. Steve Soper now stands a chance of winning a victory in this race at Portugal and putting himself back in with a real chance of ETC victory. Giving a fine example of how a modern racing driver looks a little bit like a spaceman, Niedwitz takes his pipes out and watches the Ford go back into the race. Ludwig, meanwhile, is anxious to make up ground lost by that longer-than-normal pit stop. Can he nurse a sick car home? Banks of experience in long-distance racing would suggest that Ludwig is not hard on a car, but he's as quick as anybody around. And even though they've agreed that the way it's going to finish is with Supra in front, Ludwig will probably make him work for it, was the general feeling that everybody had. Meanwhile, Ravaglia was really cracking on with the BMW. Roberto, at 30 years old, hails from Venice. He won the World Championship in 1987. He has driven single-seaters. But look at this for a real pedigree, with a James Hardy figuring well in his list of successes, as well as third in the Italian Formula 3 Championship. He still dreams of driving single-seaters, but he seems to be the man to beat in saloons. He's fast and he takes care of them. BMW's run in Portugal was a good one, but Supra's was a better one at this stage of the contest. Reeling off the laps with consummate ease, now recognised by everyone as one of the top saloon drivers in the world. Steve has confined himself to this sort of racing, showing little or no interest in getting into the World Endurance Championship for sports cars, or for that matter, looking at single-seaters. He's good in the wet, he's good in traffic, and it came good in Portugal with his second win in the championship. This time sharing with Klaus Niedwitz. Behind Egger and Ravaglia, maximum points for them, the Donny and Ludwig, Questra and Van der Poel, Vogt and Lafitte, and Martin and Thatcher. The champagne flows, and we talk to Steve Soper, who gives us a lesson in diplomacy.
No, it wasn't planned, but it was discussed that if one car would have trouble, as Klaus Ludwig had no points at all after Monza and after Donington, that obviously I would go in a car, if one car had problem, I would go in the better car, which unfortunately for Pierre turned out to be that way.
And Klaus Niedwitz, your first win this season, the first of many, I hope.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have win this race. The first time this year. I hope I can win more.
Championship positions: Ravaglia 93, Van der Poel 83, Soper 80, Niedwitz 70, the Donny 67, and Albert and Schauer 62. After all that ball from Soper, I beg your pardon, diplomacy, it's not surprising that he's met a butcher. Klaus Niedwitz, with his assistant there in the background, the Donne, and the Gneidige Frau, who preserved Stephen's manhood, or whatever it was he was going to remove. And if inside the car's a bit like her oven, we ask Klaus Ludwig if that suit really works, if it does its job.
Oh, absolutely. It's not only the chest, which is cool, it's also the head. And that gives you a tremendous help. It's unbelievable. It was invented by NASA, and the space pilots, they are using it. So I used it first in 81 in IMSA, and it's really unbelievable how much it helps.
How many of you are using it? All of you now?
Yes, all. Every driver has this unit, and we have a box in the car. It's filled with...
Really difficult circuit. Is very hard because you have to be fit, because the temperature is a little bit high, and then never you have relaxed during the race because the straight is not so long, so every part is a little bit hard for the driver.
So you were a good boy last night, went to bed early?
Yes, really.
Thank you. Alfred Hager starts off in the BMW camera car. And this is a good, tight circuit for BMWs to show what they can do on. The question being, the Yokohama shop cars of the Benghazi team are definitely on the pace, more so than the Schnitzer cars at this stage of the season. Up front, it's the usual Ford battle to start with, but there's a surprise in store for all of them. Once the BMWs have got over fighting among themselves for supremacy, And among them, once again, Pirot, the man who makes the mistake and drops back a little bit. The Fords find they've got a real challenge. Pirot in third place initially, but behind him, Olivier Griard with a Benghazi car. And as the race wears on and the circuit takes its toll of tyres, the Benghazi car obviously is going to be the one to beat. First, Ludwig leads, with the Donny following along in second place. The BMWs, however, soon begin to close the gap and are, right from the word go, always in contention, even as far as an outright lead is concerned. Lock brakes and all. Griard is going superbly, outdistancing all the Schnitzer cars and push on the tail of the Fords. 29 years old Belgian Olivier Griard may not have had the success due to him in single-seaters, but he's certainly getting it in saloons, and he's really showing the Fords a thing or two here in Spain. Eventually, he finds a way by, right on the inside again, locked wheel as well. Out he comes, trouble with a slower car that doesn't see him initially, and then cuts through on the inside of that, and begins to close the gap on the leader in dramatic style. On the grass, off it again, hurling the car round the circuit here, as one of the Fords finds a problem with a flat tyre and broken bodywork. Driven incidentally by Brancatelli on occasions, this car, of which more later in the season. Now it's a battle between Ford and BMW, and Olivier Griard is vying to take the lead away from the Eggenberger Fords for the first time on level terms. He's right behind and looking to find a way through. It's the tyres on the Ford that are beginning to cause them problems. And the BMW seems to have the right tyres, the right gearing, and the right torque for this circuit. Eventually, he struggles to the front as Ford take their first pit stop, and goes on and on and on, passing here the Maserati of Thomas Lindstrom. Behind, the second car in the team is very much on the pace. The Fords can do very little about the BMWs when they're running well on this circuit. And the Benghazi team are absolutely beside themselves with joy for two reasons. A, they're putting it across Schnitzer, and B, they're putting it across the Fords, who are busily trying to make up ground after their first pit stop. Alfred Hager wrestling with the wheel of the M3 here, a tough driver at all times. It's a wide-open race in Harama in the fourth round of the championship, and Charlie Lamb is getting worried as there are all sorts of problems with tyres for the BMWs. Griard seems to go on forever. Those of us in the pits watched and wondered just what the duration of this car was going to be. They only need one stop with the M3 as opposed to two, and Jacques Lafitte was anxiously waiting to take over. Peter Floor did not want to interfere, but he felt the car might be out there for too long. Out went the Ford after another scheduled stop, and it looked as if BMWs were going to win. Schnitzer were the first of the significant BMWs to make their stops, with Ravaglia taking over 56, following the problems that Pirot had had with 57. He was in still with a chance, but he was going to be behind the Benghazi cars, who by this stage of the race were running in first and third places with a possibility of finishing first and second. Away went the Schnitzer car, and all Benghazi had to do was to emulate their teamwork, when first there was a problem as Winnie Vogt brought in number 51. A half shaft had gone on the car. Most of the team were oblivious of this at this stage, and Thatcher was to get behind the wheel and wait to go out for an interminable time. Winnie Vogt took off his helmet. All seemed fairly relaxed as the team worked on this car. The second Ford had its stop. The Benghazi team seemed to be in charge of the situation, even if number 52 was staying out for a very long time indeed. But Griard was on the top of his form and looked set for a BMW victory. There was nothing really that the Fords could do to close in spite of the fact that by now his tyres were worn and he was almost empty of fuel. Soper was using all the Ford Sierra's power and all the Ford Sierra's brakes in an effort to catch up. and recovered very well then from a big moment. But the biggest moment of the race was shortly after 51 got back into it in the hands of Mark Thatcher. The team had forgotten number 52. Stricken by the side of the road, virtually out of petrol, they'd thrown away the race that they could have won for BMW. Supra was back in the lead, and Griard's effort had come to nothing. There was consternation, there was argument, and in fact, in that pit, nobody wanted to talk to anybody, having thrown the race away by, quite frankly, a mistake that should never happen in a long-distance race. Griard was led away almost in tears. Jacques Lafitte had given up and gone away and came back into the pit again to carry on, dispirited, fed up, and not wanting to talk to anybody. It's a rare thing to see Jacques lose his temper. Having brought the car in on the starter motor, it might have occurred to them that they'd have a flat battery as well to contend with. But that was something else that didn't really happen as far as the Bugatti team was concerned. And once more, the return of this car to the race was delayed even further, while another battery was fetched from the pits. Eventually, it burst into life. Back into the race went Lafitte, a long way behind. The faces of the mechanics say it all. The Fords were back in the lead, and all looked as if it was going to go their way, right the way to the finish here in Spain. The circuit is a slow one, and it was often a question as to whether or not the cars would compete the full distance in the time allowed, or whether the flag would come out before full distance was in fact completed. The weather too might well have played its part, and in a dramatic finish to the race, it certainly gave us all a tremendous soaking, and at the same time gave us food for thought. All had seemed well. With 5 laps to go, Ravaglia was in 3rd place, going hard, going fast, but not as quick as the Bugatti cars. And then, in that last 5 laps, just as he was really getting down to it and holding them but not gaining, the rain came down. Perhaps basing their decision on the number of laps and not the time elapsed, BMW made a decision to go on to rain tyres at the very last moment. And the gamble perhaps could have paid off. In came the Schnitzer cars to change onto wets, but there just wasn't time. And the Fords, although they were prepared for their cars to come in, soldiered on slick tyres on what was a very wet circuit indeed. There were anxious eyes as out went the BMWs again on rain tyres, but the flag was out early and the race was over, a 1-2 victory for the Ford Sierras. Ludwig and Soper, Dodoni and Niedritz, Ostrich and Ravaglia, Hager and Pole, Griard and Lafitte, 5th, a poor reward, Vanacek and Tomacek, the first 6. It was a quick escape to the plane for some of the drivers after this race, with another one following up shortly afterwards. And the championship positions now saw Ravaglia with only 5 points on Soper, Van der Poel not so far behind, then Niedritz, Dodon, Alba and Charroux. There was some pretty good Chateaubriand in France at Dijon, washed down by a good French wine for round 5 of the championship. And Eggenberger had got a change in the team, with Brancatelli coming back. Gianfranco had driven the BMW with success last year, but this year it's been a bit sparse. I asked him how he liked the car and the team.
Yes, very nice. Best team, best car, I'm very happy.
How did this all happen for you?
They just called me because of Ludwig. He has to go in German Championship this weekend, next weekend, and they asked me for Spa also because they need 3 drivers per car, and probably the 24 hours Nürburgring too.
And BMW asked me to drive, and I say yes, because the Bugatti team is a very good team. Italian, French, German, English on the team was perfect. It's a team really good team, not taking the racing too much serious, you know, because I don't like that, and I enjoy it because we have nothing to do, but all is cool, quiet, and easy for me.
From one man who's enjoying his racing to another, Klaus Niedwitz gives us the thumbs up prior to the start and hopes that perhaps this is going to be another victory for him. Once again, Pierre Dodoni is the other man to watch, but the Nissan is back, and after a disappointing time in practice, is hoping that the race will prove more competitive. Paris-Dakar organiser René Mech made the Eggenberger cars go right at the start, and the BMWs weren't so far behind. Dijon is another of those difficult circuits. A loop out of the back with its downhill swerves and downhill hairpin being particularly awkward at times. There was a fair queue of traffic down there, and the Benghazi cars didn't seem to have quite recovered from the shock of not winning in Spain. Soon, it was the usual Eggenberger benefit, with car number 1 out front and looking for all the world as if it intended to stay there. A locked brake there almost ended the race for Klaus Niedwitz, but he got it back again in one of the biggest moments of the year. He plugged on towards victory, however, determined to show that this car was going to be the one to beat. There's no doubt that Dijon made a spectacular addition this year to the ETCC, having been a World Touring Car Championship round in 1987. And Mech, well, sooner or later he was going to get caught, and the man to do it was Alan Grice. Grice was really showing that the Nissan was being developed well, but nevertheless the BMWs were staying right with him and making life a bit difficult. Eventually, a combination of tyres and brakes saw him drop back a bit from the Ford that began to eat into Pierre Dodoni's second place, as Mech really got the taste for it. The BMWs were snapping at the Nissan's heels, and Mech looked for all the world as if he was driving on 1 hour, not a 4-hour race. He hurled the car around in spectacular style, and we were all hoping that we might get a chance to see René Mech proving that he could really stay with the best in the European Touring Car Championship. Grice wrestled a bit with the Nissan as those tyres began to go off more, but still it was the Eggenberger cars out front, and Mech hurling his car round in an effort to catch up the second of them. The BMW was able to stay with Alan at this stage. It was all spectacular and it was all fun, but it was all at a bit of a distance. Time alone would tell whether every car would last, and Klaus Niedwitz, at 36 years old with the Ford Sierra, was obviously going to be the man to catch. Niedwitz is another man with a huge history of success behind him. He's driven for Eggenberger in 86 and 87 and now 88. He's been runner-up and is certainly one of the coolest customers around. Following his accident in Germany, it's going to be a short season for Klaus, but we expect to see him back soon. BMW pit stops and Ravaglia makes his decision. He's into car number 57 as we wait for the Fords to make their stop as well, and Soper to make his choice of which car he takes. Away goes the BMW, and in comes Ford number 1. Decision taken here, and in gets Steve. Everything looks set for another Soper-Niedwitz victory with no problems whatsoever. Brancatelli thought he was going to have that car. Perhaps that fired him up a bit. Who knows? But the story begins to unfold in a moment or two. In comes car number 2. Pierre Dodoni to take over that one. Gianfranco had said how much he liked the team, how much he liked the car, and how much he was enjoying himself. And when Soper had a puncture on the far side of the circuit and had to come in for a wheel change, the story began to look definitely as if Gianfranco might be in for a maiden win on his return to the Eggenberger team. Once out there in the lead, he was going faster and faster. Nobody in the Eggenberger team could be quite sure just what Gianfranco Brancatelli was going to do. The Italian temperament was up there, he was leading a race, he hadn't won an ETC for a very long time, and the temptation perhaps to ignore anything that the pit said to him over the radio or signal from the sidelines probably would have been too much. There was a spot or two of rain. That didn't make a great deal of difference. The Nissan retired. We can't tell you the real reason except that it wasn't just transmission trouble, and Win Percy was more than a little put out for the reason. The second round of stops for the Eggenberger team saw them make a common-sense team decision. They put back Pierre Dodonné. Out came Brancatelli, and Dodonné it was who led the race as car number 1 came in. In the speed of the pit stop, Eggenberger for once seemed to lose his presence of mind. He didn't tell Steve that Dodonné was behind the wheel of car number 2. And Steve set off just as determined as ever before to try and catch up with what he thought was Gianfranco Brancatelli. Pierre was well aware of the situation, thought that Steve was listening to the radio, thought that he might even be able to tell Steve on the radio what was going on. But Steve was far too excited for that. It was therefore a big surprise to find that it was Pierre Dodonné that was letting him catch up and pass, and not Gianfranco Brancatelli that was going to race with him. And even that was in doubt for him right the way to the flag, as playful Pierre decided to give him a chance and pretend that he was going to come through into the lead again on the very last lap. Third place, Ravaglia in the BMW. Soldiering on, still in the lead of the championship, as out came the flag for a Ford 1-2 in France. So the results, Niedewitz and Soper, Dodonné Brancatelli. Paul Ravaglia, Vaught Lafitte, Giraud and Dor, his last drive unfortunately in the ETCC prior to his accident, and then the Toyota next up. And Soper with 160 points had a 3-point lead now on Ravaglia in the championship from Van der Poel third. And delighted Steve Soper waves the cup. And Branco, well, he does seem a bit subdued. Controlling an Italian in France is one thing, controlling him in Italy is something entirely different. At Vallelunga, there was every chance that the Fords would repeat their performance, but the question was who to team up Soper with. Perhaps the best thing was to put Branca behind the wheel of a car to start with. That way somebody was bound to get it right. Away they went, camera car working overtime again, on what is a very interesting circuit in the ETC. And this time, getting the drop on the Bugatti car is one of the Schnitzer BMWs, and one wonders for how long. Ford, as usual, are away in the lead. First and second, in fact. Niedewitz sets the pace in number 1. There's a thin drizzle going on at this stage. Brancatelli, all under control in second place. And Pirro, another Italian, not perhaps quite so much under control in third place. In car now, and something I think that you shouldn't really do to an Italian. Dent his car and you're inclined to cause him to lose his temper. And here as Pirro makes his effort to get through into second place, Brancatelli finds himself pushed off on the outside of the corner with no damage to the car but an awful lot to his temper. It availed Emanuele Pirro nothing at all. The car was slightly damaged and had to come into the pits at the conclusion of the lap. But to give you an idea what it meant to Gianfranco Brancatelli, watch the way the Ford comes past the camera car on the straight as they come up towards the pits. By this stage, he really meant business and absolutely flashes through, rain or not, back into second place in very determined style. He now set off after Niedewitz, and if anyone was telling him otherwise, Branco was taking no notice. Out of the pits with black lines behind him came a livid Emanuele Pirro, but he caused it and he'd only himself to blame. Meanwhile, Niedewitz was finding the car skittish and Brancatelli was revelling on Italian home ground. Jacques Lafitte had started off in number 52 and was certainly looking as if he could be a man to be reckoned with here. As the Fords closed up together, Lafitte pushed himself up into third place within a matter of a few minutes of this shot. Brancatelli took over the lead and began to try to pull away, and Niedewitz tried to follow. He raced through the traffic as if it wasn't there, and Niedewitz undoubtedly followed. And Branca was determined that he was going to win in Italy, as shoals of Toyotas got in the way of Jacques Lafitte with some ground to make up on them now. The two Fords fought as if they were in opposing teams at this stage of the event. The damp weather was perhaps making life even more exciting if you were in the lead. But Branca had no hesitation in throwing the Ford around, using all the power and holding Niedewitz at bay. The pit stops alone were perhaps going to settle which of the two cars came out A in the lead and B were instructed to stay there. And the wiseness of putting Branca in car number 2 at the start looked as if it was about to pay off. Now he began to stretch the elastic a little, and Niedewitz began to drop back. Branca gained in confidence lap by lap, past BMWs or anything else that got in the way. Absolutely delighted at a car that was holding together and proving that he could drive now as quickly as in the days of when he was winning championships with Volvos. Gianfranco Brancatelli is still one of the quickest drivers around in the European Touring Car Championship. And the misfortune of Klaus Niedewitz later in the season to break his arm so badly has meant that he's found a fairly regular place in the Eggenberger team. As Niedewitz's tyres went off, it was pit stop time for the Eggenberger boys and decision time for Steve Soper. Which would it be? Out climbed Branca and in climbed Steve. Oddly enough, these two were the misfits in the TWR team, neither being happy there and both glad to be out of it, one of Tom's few failures when it came to picking drivers. In came car number 1, Pierre Dodonne to take over from Niedewitz, who really had a tough time out there. But all wasn't running well as far as the number 2 car was concerned. Almost the moment it got out of the pits, Steve Soper was not a happy man. Soon he was back in again. There were some fairly baleful looks under the bonnet, and the water on the floor told the reason why. Ravaglia's helmet hides his smile and Peter Floor looks on, as that's the end of the Steve Soper challenge as far as Vallelunga's concerned. But for BMW, it's an entirely different story. One broken egg and Eggenberger out of the race and only one surviving. But Ravaglia began to show why he is the World Touring Car Champion and still the most likely man to win the European Championship. He realized that the Ford had another stop to make. It made it, and the gap between Dodonne and Ravaglia was a shrinking one all the time in the final stages. You can see how close to the limit the Ford is, as charging along behind, Roberto Ravaglia in the M3 sees that there might be a chance for victory. Broken cars around the circuit, but no broken Fords, as across the line comes the Singleton Eggenberger car at the end of the race, some 15 seconds in front. Niedewitz and Dodonne, Van der Poel, Ravaglia, Lafitte and Voigt finishing first, second and third, with Thatcher a good fourth again. So halfway through, Roberto Ravaglia is now back in charge of the championship, some 12 points ahead of Klaus Niedewitz, with Eric Van der Poel on 175 behind in third. On the manufacturer's side, it's BMW with 209, just 9 points ahead of Ford Cosworth, with Toyota in third place with 122. Laurels then for Klaus Niedewitz and for Pierre Dodonne at the end of the halfway point of the 1988 European Touring Car Championship, led by Ravaglia as we go on to the Nürburgring and the second half of the season. The second half of the European Touring Car Championship for 1988 really started at the Nürburgring, and this was a race with a difference, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Points-wise, it was a 12-point lead for Ravaglia at this stage of the season. Van der Poel up there in third place and Pierre Dodoni in fourth, and then Steve Soper in fifth, just ahead of Mark Thatcher. The last half of the season was obviously going to be close, and the championship was still wide open. It's pretty rare that the sun shines on the Nürburgring. What everybody else wanted to know was the sun going to shine on the new race format here?
Steve, here we are at the Nürburgring with a new concept as far as European touring cars are concerned, a race run in 2 heats. How do you view this proposition?
I don't actually know at the moment. I'll tell you more after it's all over. It could be good, could be bad, but I think it's probably different. Maybe it's been done to help the BMWs a bit around here, I don't know, because obviously we'll have to make an extra fuel stop and they can probably run through both heats without a stop.
You will actually have to have a pit stop then, will you?
Yeah, in both heats we'll have to make a stop for fuel, only for 10 or 15 seconds worth of fuel, but we will have to stop, yeah.
The Ford is still too quick for us, and I mean, also with one stop more, I think they can win easy.
For the two-part race, Jeff Allen was to start in the Wolf Ford as opposed to Armin Hahne to do the second half of the race. Pierre Dodoni starting in one of the Eggenberger cars, and Klaus Ludwig to start in the other one. Niedwitz at this stage of the season out of the race following breaking his arm in an earlier race at the Nürburgring. Away goes the pace car, and out go the cars with Jeff Allen leading them on this warm-up lap as they come up to the flying start. Nissan's hopes of doing well in Germany were high. It's a twisty circuit, and certainly as far as BMW are concerned, they felt that they too possibly stood a chance of winning here. From the start, it was Allen away in the lead, with the 2 Eggenberger Fords tight behind him and the BMWs crowding in as well. Past Markus Ostreich came the Nissan. While at the front of the field, it was a pretty tight group of cars, led as always by an Eggenberger Ford. The BMWs well up, and some tight queuing going on here. Soon it became obvious that the heir of the Eggenberger team was going to be Ludwig. The BMWs were fighting closely, the Bigazzi cars, as always, literally wheel to wheel with the Schnitzer cars. But a gap began to emerge between Ludwig and everybody else. Ford's pit stops here were going to be difficult. Nissan should have got away with 1 stop, and so should BMW. But the Fords would definitely have to make 2. And Ludwig was in a hurry to put some distance between himself and his competitors. He'd succeeded in some measure in doing this when his first scheduled stop came in to be perhaps the most important thing about this race. The new Nürburgring is a totally different circuit to the old one. In car now, with one of the M3s, as the spinning Sierra is avoided. And Pierre Dodoni makes his scheduled stop with the other Texaco Ford Sierra. The weather proving not to be a factor at the Nürburgring for a change, although the clouds were certainly greyer than at the start of the race. Back out on the track, Klaus Ludwig, fighting his way back to the front once more. Part 1 of this race, a 2-part race, as the drivers explained, not proving to be as close a battle as they'd hoped. Nevertheless, the Bigazzi car going well there. Ludwig and the Sierra, very much a man to watch. Out on the fast twists and swerves of the Nürburgring, and the car going absolutely beautifully. Coming up to take the checkered flag to make it a Ford 1-2 with Dodoni in second place in part 1 here of this race at the Nürburgring. This is how they finished. Ludwig, Dodoni, Griard, Pirot, Ostreich, Vogt and Thierry Tassin. And notice that the Nissan isn't in the hunt at this stage of the game, sidelined by fuel problems. Steve Soper now at the wheel of Ford Sierra number 1 to take part in the second part of the race. It had been a mixed event as far as the Armin Hahne car was concerned. Way down in 20th odd position, and Hahne to do the second half and win Percy to drive the luckless Nissan. Away from the line, however, the BMWs and the Fords close together as before. Hahne very much a man to watch on the Nürburgring, was soon on terms with both the Eggenberger cars. Supra here leading Brancatelli, then Harama, and then the BMWs led by Jacques Lafitte. The Fords were trying to storm away and build up something of a lead, that extra pit stop of course making all the difference, and Harama staying with the two Eggenberger cars. Supra there, still leading the bunch, and Harama still hanging on in third place. But once again, he wasn't a really figure in the overall results. The real battle was a little bit further back behind the Fords. The BMWs were fighting as closely as ever. Emanuele Pirro had not been able to catch and pass, in the first part of the race, the car that was driven by Olivier Griard, and Jacques Lafitte was doing exactly the same to Roberto Ravaglia. Lafitte may have retired from Grand Prix racing, but he's still capable of a tremendous turn of speed. The Spa 24-hour race is the blue ribbon of the European Touring Car Championship and BMW chances.
Yes, I think this is very important race for me and also for Steve. I think after this race, maybe we know already who is the champion for this year. But I want to try until I have some chance, and maybe I will try also after Spa also if I have small chance to win the championship. But we see it's very hard race. I think could be also very good race because Ford has very nice and very quick drivers, and also BMW. And I think the chance for BMW are not so bad for this race.
Well, everything is looking very good because I think we have a very, very good chance to win. But of course, this is a very, very, very long race, and a lot of things can happen. But the good thing is that because we are so much faster here, we can take it reasonably easily.
Spa always attracts some beautiful girls and a number of the beautiful people, i.e. the Grand Prix drivers. Joining up with the usual compatriots, it also sees people like Dieter Quester coming back, who's been primarily involved in the German Championship this year for BMW. And a tremendously packed grid as the Saab pace car pulls off at 5 o'clock. 3 Sierras. This time the Eggenberger team leaving nothing to chance. And adding to their driving talent, Thierry Boutsen, Didier Tay and Bernd Schneider. Also Bertrand Gachot, another Belgian. And it was soon the mixture as before, but the BMWs were very determined to stay on pace. In a long race like this, in the past, the 635s were inevitably the victors, except for the year, of course, when Jaguar won. And here, BMW were hoping that the detuned Sierras would not quite last the pace. The game of musical chairs was going on with abundance as well. Everybody being very careful to get their number one man for the championship as late as possible into a car. The Spa circuit is now as difficult as ever it was. It may have been shortened, but it's a spectacular race. The Schnitzer BMWs well and truly in the hunt from the word go, behind the 2 Fords. There's little doubt that turbocharged cars don't really like long-distance races. The Benghazi BMW of Olivier Griard, Jacques Lafitte and Winnie Vogt, well up in the early stages. And the Nissan 2 going well. The odd 635 still making an appearance in a race like this and standing a chance of finishing as well, although this one wasn't so lucky. Cyril Ray's car losing a wheel. He narrowly missed still the front of the Toyota before crashing against the barrier. Pit stop time, and everything still going to plan as far as the Fords were concerned. There's still a certain amount of discussion going on in the pits, however. Peter Floor soon to leave BMW, directing operations as 6:30 comes along. The Bigazzi car comes in number 52, followed by the Schnitzer car. Pit work in the early stages is easy, as it gets later and people get tired that it becomes more problematical. Thierry Boutsin just out of the car and about to take over another one as trouble begins to hit the Ford Sierras. In comes the number 3 car, Bertrand Gachot at the wheel for a change of driver. While out on the circuit, it's now becoming more and more obvious that BMWs are very much in the hunt. Byler goes out at the wheel of number 3 car in the Eggenberger team, while Anders Olofsson has been added to the driving strength of Nissan. A BMW in the failing light. And as lights come on, BMWs begin to become more and more to the fore in the 24-hour race at Spa in 1988. Since this is the final year of the European Touring Car Championship, one perhaps hopes that this race at least will be preserved. It is an opportunity for Group A saloons and cars that you and I can buy, or very similar to them, to take part in an international race. The scoreboards, the lights of the village, the towns surrounding, and of course the inevitable fairground and food, all part and parcel of a 24-hour race that makes it rather different to any other sort of motorsport event. And the noise of those cars through the night as some snatch sleep and others still have to advise drivers as to their situation. The Byler Schneider Gachot number 3 Ford Sierra. And in comes also the Nissan too. The problems of the night met by most of the teams and dealt with. And as that night wears on, of course, the changing position in the race becomes more and more obvious. BMW are very strong indeed when it comes to 24 hours, and by morning are getting towards having command of the race. The little M3 BMW is capable of putting in the same sort of performance over a distance like this as its 635 elder brother was in earlier years. The Sierras may be quicker, but they're definitely more brittle. And even with the driving talent that Rudi Eggenberger had employed, it was a BMW victory very much on the cards at Spa right from the word go. The question was, how many and how much of them? The number 57 Schnitzer car spins harmlessly here and is collected back together again. Meanwhile, the number 56 car goes on towards victory. And Roberto Ravaglia knows, as he goes past some of the slower cars on the circuit, let alone those who retired, that he's got this race more or less in his pocket. And very definitely some precious points towards yet another championship victory. 11:05 on Sunday morning. And once again, it's a panic for the Ford team. Back goes the car, but BMWs now look set to snatch yet another victory at Spa. The hours are reeled off by the M3 drivers, and it's a resounding reward to superb preparation and magnificent team management by Charlie Lamb and the rest of the boys that once again the Schnitzer cars are almost now becoming the kings of the Spa 24-hour race. The M3 BMW, so similar to all the 3 Series in body and everything else, has at its heart the ex-Formula 2 BMW engine. Now in 2.3-litre form, very much a reliable and quick source of power that can take the car to victory in shorter races as well as the 24 hours. Curb hopping, the Fords charge on, still trying to close the gap. But it's an impossible task. As always, the final stages of the Spa 24-hour race bring their fair share of panic pit stops. The Benghazi cars have not perhaps shone here as they have in other races, but nevertheless, BMW have things comfortably in their pocket as they race on towards victory. There's never any shortage of spectators at Spa to watch the 24-hour race. The ever-increasing demand for shorter races for television purposes is perhaps going in the wrong direction when races of this classical type are being all but ignored. 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and the checkered flag about to go out for a BMW victory in Belgium. The Spa circuit, bathed in sunshine, as so often it's washed in rain, sees the BMWs form up for a line-ahead finish as they go past the flag. The final order for BMW in the 1988 Spa 24-hour race is as follows. Hager, Questa and Ravaglia the winners. Boutsen, Ludwig and Dodoni second with Ford. Briard and Lafitte third for BMW. Schneider, Wiener and Soper fourth. Holtze, Hollinger and Minaj fifth. And Grice, Percy and Olofsson sixth. And the championship positions see Ravaglia increasing his lead.
Roberta, a tremendous victory. How does it feel?
Well, of course, I'm quite happy. And for me it was very important to win the race for the championship. But, well, now all the drivers from Ford has chance because also Dijon, he comes second and Super fourth. And Ludwig also has some chance to win the championship. So I think it's a little bit better, but doesn't change a lot. We have to try in Zolder and Novgorod. A circuit could be good for M3, and we see.
The teams remain in Belgium for the next round of the 1988 European Touring Car Championship at Zolder. And once again, Fords are hoping perhaps for a victory. The return also of Klaus Niedwitz following his recovery from injury, still with that arm giving him trouble. But what of Nissan's chances here, as up to the line comes the number 4 Ford of Armin Hahner.
There are people farther down the paddock that think that you've turned the boost up a bit more for this meeting and are a bit concerned about your progress. Would this be right?
The car's good on a tight, twisty circuit anyway, which this is obviously. Hasn't got the long straights of Spa or Dijon, places like that. It ran well at Nürburgring, if you remember, apart from the problems we had with the fuel. We've got a bit more power, but that isn't what it is. It's just the fact that the Yokohamas are working well around here and the car's handling well. We've got a little bit more power, but I hope we're a threat to them. Someone's got to be soon.
And another threat certainly was coming from Armin Hahner. Ill luck perhaps had hit that team, but not BMWs. And there was every chance that was going to be a big fight here, with, of course, as when Percy explained, torque playing a major part in this particular circuit. The Nissan, 5th fastest in practice, and providing an ideal camera base as they set off from the line, trying to get among the Fords. And succeeding, too, in the bumping and boring into the first chicane. Ford's 1st, 2nd and 3rd, Nissan 4th, BMW 5th, and then Ford and more BMWs with the rest of the Fords tucked in behind. But this definitely had the makings of a tough battle. There was one other factor, however, at Zolder that no one had quite considered. Ford's got away in the lead. The Nissan was right on the pace. But what was the weather going to do? By now, Eggenberger had decided that 3 Sierras had got to be the go for the rest of the championship while there was still a chance of winning it. Driver's style, that is. Manufacturing-wise, the Fords were doing well, but Ravaglia and BMW were still heading them, in spite of anything that Klaus Ludwig could do at the head of the field. Fords needed to win every round. A lot of rubber around the circuit with tight corners doesn't make life easy, particularly when people drop oil and you get brakes log up. Ford number 2 here, trying to force his way up past Armin Hahne, and followed there by the Nissan. Very close order indeed. Alan Grice looks for the inside there, as going past into 2nd place, the second of the Eggenberger cars. We look outside again and watch the progress of this tight battle. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and there's 5th man. Up on the inside and clouting the body, all but spinning round the Armin Hahne car, the Nissan is up. Or is it? No, back comes Hahne again to take away the place, and it's the first dent. Now it remains to be seen whether or not the weather will play its part here. Ford's 1st and 2nd, and in 3rd place the Hahne car, then with the Nissan still struggling on. There are a few spots on the windscreen, as back for another charge on the tail of Armin Hahne comes Alan Grice. And this time he's alongside and through. On the limit motoring by the 44 years old Australian, who waves to the opposition as he disappears off into the distance. Nissan now up into 3rd place. Now it's a challenge for 2nd, and you can see how hard the Ford is trying up ahead. Down a gear, and Grice looks for the inside here. In a straight line, when it can use its power, the Sierra is still probably just a little bit quicker. But the torque is there as a big dive on the inside, and once again a clash of bodies. Nissan up to 2nd place. The Ford comes back again with the inside line, taking that position back again and causing Grice to use the curbs. Meanwhile, the weather is darkening overhead, and the headlights are not on just to tell slower cars of the approach. Rain is coming down, cars are on slicks, and this is the battle for 2nd and 3rd places again. More close encounters and a clash of bodywork. On the outside, still the Ford as they go past a slower car. And now the real drama, as the Nissan gets sideways, so does the Ford. There's a further accident between them, and then in front of Toyota spins. Damage once again to the Nissan on the other side of the car, and it's the pits for Alan Grice. Meanwhile, shot on rain tyres, Eric van der Poel takes his BMW back into the race. The Schnitzer team having timed that pit stop absolutely right. Down the pit road, signals from marshals to slow, as all over the place there are cars off the road. In spite of the fact that he's on rain tyres and here slipping the clutch quite vigorously, Van der Poel too has a problem with traction. Meanwhile, the Nissan has also gone onto wets and begins to try to rejoin the race. Once again, there's a queue, however, at the end of the pit road, and the pace car is out so that some of the cars that are stranded on the circuit can be collected. Thierry Tassin's Ford is now in second place, and closing on the BMW of Eric van der Poel takes over the lead. From his pit stop to change tyres, however, Klaus Ludwig is very much on a charge with the Eggenberger Sierra. Behind, the Nissan follows, but there's a touch between the two Sierras, and while Tassin goes on, Ludwig goes off, over the curbing to damage the car and is thus out of the race. The Nissan is back on the track again, but only just. A BMW here spins in front of him. Grice succeeds in missing the incident, but sets off again as Roberto Ravaglia waits to take over his BMW. A quick stop here, and the BMW is obviously a strong contender in conditions such as this. Van der Poel straps in Ravaglia and has to alter the seat and the belts to get him in the car because he's so much smaller. But the mechanics' work is finished, and it's off the jacks and back into the race. Meanwhile, still in the lead is Thierry Tassin with the Ford. But the BMW, in the hands of Roberto Ravaglia, is closing fast and hard. Once again, the weather has just worked out right for the BMW team. As the track dries, they're back onto slick tyres again. Ravaglia, on the limit, starts to close the gap. Literally giving the car everything it's got, Ravaglia is busily trying to close his gap, while still there's one Eggenberger Ford in the race. It's not, however, going to be an Eggenberger Ford day here at Zolder. Ravaglia makes one of his rare mistakes and ends up off the road in his efforts to catch the leader. Other BMWs are having problems as well, as once again the rain comes down. The weather certainly added to the drama here at Zolder. Following its pit stop, the number 14 Ford Sierra has now lost the lead. Other cars are still having difficulty with the conditions. Number 3 Ford also has made its second stop. It's now a question of who has the right tyre choice. Out comes the BMW once more. In very difficult conditions indeed, with the cars in fact narrowed in performance by the wet weather. Here's Armin Hahn's Ford Sierra having a moment there with the car coming out of the pits. It's a very much closer battle between Ford and BMW for the honours at Zolder, and the honours particularly at stake in the Drivers' Championship. Number 57, Schnitzer BMW, with Roberto Ravaglia at the wheel, is the car that everybody has to beat if they're going to in fact retain any chance of taking that championship away. Just 2 rounds left in the championship at this stage, the weather conditions positively horrible, and BMW hanging on to a precarious lead in Belgium. The flag is out, BMW win, and Ravaglia's victory here means that only one man could possibly beat him for the championship, Pierre Dodoni, if he wins both rounds. Those are the results here, and these are the championship positions as we look now at the presentation here to Roberto Ravaglia and Eric van der Poel. 294 points to Dodoni's 275, then Steve Soper with 250 out of the hunt as regards the Drivers' Championship. And so to Silverstone. The Tourist Trophy is the oldest race in Great Britain, and indeed one of the oldest races in the world. The three Eggenberger Sierras are obviously in there to try and wrest that championship away from BMW. And by finishing first, second and third, they could do just that. But that isn't where the opposition starts and finishes. There's Andy Rouse with the British Championship leading car, and Dick Johnson, the winner of the Australian Touring Car Championship, who we talked to about the race.
So far, so good. We've completed all but 5 laps of race distance so far, and the car's been performing extremely well, and things have really been running our way.
What are your thoughts on Silverstone?
I think it's a grouse circuit. Any circuit that's new is different, and especially this one because it's so fast, and it's great to drive on a circuit that's so fast.
Now, you've met the Europeans at Bathurst, now you meet them on their own home ground. Have you taken any special precautions?
Well, after the thrashing they dealt us at Bathurst last year, I thought it's about time that we, because our cars were going very well in Australia, that we just saw how we could keep up with them over here and just see whether our development was line ball with theirs. And so far we've sort of come up trumps.
Not taking too many tricks was Tom Walkinshaw with the newly homologated Holden, and not happy.
Well, like all racing cars, you wish it went faster, but, it's competitive at the moment. The Sierra's a little bit quicker out of the corners because they're lighter, but the Holden's actually quicker in the second half of the straight, so it's just a case of trying to keep the brakes on it because it's a big, heavy car.
How many changes have been made from the previous car? Is it easier to say how many haven't, what hasn't been changed?
It's a totally different car, so... you just couldn't list the changes, they're so numerous, but it really handles well, it stops well, and it's going well. I think it'll go very well at Bathurst.
The fact that it didn't was purely academic, as the cars went round behind the pace car at the start of the Tourist Trophy. And immediately it was Dick Johnson starting off in the Australian Ford Sierra that took the lead in the car that he was later to share with John Burr. Behind the two Eggenberger cars, and then Armin Hahne and also Andy Rouse. The Nissan too well up at this stage. A number of other competitors for the British Championship were taking part as well, making it a packed field at Silverstone. By far and away the best turnout of cars we were to see in the 1988 European Touring Car Championship. The Eggenberger Challenge was coming from Steve Soper and from Klaus Ludwig. Armin Hahne sharing with Howell Gross next up, and then Andy Rouse as we go aboard Win Percy with the Nissan. Here Percy in the car that promised so much for the future of the championship is following the Holden of Tom Walkinshaw. At one time, Walkinshaw, of course, was his partner in the European Touring Car Championship. Up now to the new Woodcote corner. Johnson in the lead. 3 wheels there, but keeping all 4 on the ground as he comes out this part of the corner. And the packed stands at Silverstone loved the fact that the Australian was dominating this race. While Johnson went on to build up a lead, behind the battle was going on between the other Fords. BMWs were quick, 150 miles an hour and losing it on the grass here for Eric van der Poel. By a miracle, he gets it back to go under the bridge and into Woodcote. No harm done. The Maserati finds itself on the grass here, losing it coming into the first part of Woodcote. But here's the other challenge in the 1988 Tourist Trophy, from Andy Rouse in the Caliber car. The 40-years-old ex-British saloon car champion was determinedly staying with the Eggenberger cars and trying to close the gap on Johnson. Having got ahead first of Soper, now Klaus Ludwig was his next victim. Silverstone is a fast circuit, and the pit work there has to be absolutely spot on if you're to retain anything of a lead, particularly with the possibility of a pace car situation. Out onto the grass there goes one of the Ford Sierras, and this was to prove one of the reasons why the pace car came out. Johnson's lead was down to a few cars' lengths. As the pace car pulled off with the incident dealt with, he'd got to deal with the problem all over again. The situation hadn't helped Rouse either. His hard-won position had been lost, and he'd got to fight back again. Dick Johnson's 43 years old. He's been immensely successful in Australia with one win in the James Hardy, but also has won their championship so many rounds, and 6 rounds this year to his credit meant that he came to Silverstone almost unbeatable. Rouse, likewise, has had a similar domination in his class in the British Championship, but because of the strength of the BMW entry there, is still, or was at this stage, fighting for championship honours, although his overall wins were unmatched. Johnson succeeded in rebuilding his lead. Rouse into second place, and the 2 Eggenberger cars behind him. Soon, however, pit stops were to play their part in the race here at Silverstone. In came Johnson to hand his car over to John Bowe, and Bowe rejoined with Steve Soper, the new leader, Rouse too having made a pit stop. With Eggenberger Ford and Schnitzer BMW playing the late driver change game, Alan Ferte was now at the wheel of Rouse's car, and was almost as quick as the master himself. John Bowe made a tremendous effort after a comparatively slow pit stop by the Australian team to catch up with the 2 Eggenberger cars. Almost unknown outside his native Australia, the 33-years-old Australian has a tremendous ability in single-seaters and sports cars, as well as in touring cars. He finished second to Johnson in a similar car in the '88 Championship. Here, brakes in fact locking up, he makes his way past Ferte. Chunks of rubber come off the tyres. The Fords fight it out. In the BMW pit, the decision is made that Ravaglia will take over the Alfred Hager car, which had started from the pit road and clawed its way back up through the field. This could be the important drive for Ravaglia, taking with him the Drivers' Championship if he gets it right here. But the pace car situations were to prove the downfall of the Australian Ford team in the 1988 Tourist Trophy at Silverstone. As Hager goes on the wall to watch Ravaglia's progress, still out there, John Bowe is making up places. They come, however, to the next round of pit stops. An unfortunate vapour lock in the Johnson car means that this is to be a long pit stop, and any chance of this car taking any further part in winning the 1988 Tourist Trophy at Silverstone is totally out of the question. He stops at the same time as one of the Eggenberger cars. Johnson about to get in again, but the car effectively out of the race. Every picture tells a story. It's steam everywhere, and after several more stops, the car was healthy again, but no longer in the running for victory. Meanwhile, the battle between the other Fords continued on the circuit as Johnson dipped in and out of the pits. Alain Ferte had handed back over to Andy Rouse, well in and among the Eggenberger Fords. It's arguable if Ford had driven to team orders throughout both the British and the Eggenberger cars, whether or not it would have been possible for Ravaglia to take the championship at Silverstone. The fact is that they didn't, and Pierre Dieudonné found himself overtaken by Andy Rouse to lose victory in the Tourist Trophy. It was a fine win for the Caliber car in the Tourist Trophy, the last to count towards the European Touring Car Championship. And 40-years-old Rouse, who was disappointed last year in the World Touring Car Championship, but was responsible for all the early development on the Ford Sierra, at least gained some reward for his hard work and recognition outside Great Britain. BMW-wise, Ravaglia did all that was asked of him. He won his class, and with it, he took victory in the final European Touring Car Championship that will be held under FISA rules for the time being. It left the Manufacturers' Championship wide open, however. Once again, Schnitzer had beaten their old rivals, the Benghazi team. Ravaglia, very much the man to watch as far as honours were concerned for the Drivers' Championship, but for the race overall, it was Andy Rouse passed the flag first. So the points positions at Silverstone, with Rouse and Ferté winning, Supra and Dodone second and Ludwig and Niedwitz third, Hager and Ravaglia winning Class B from Poland, Ostreich and Criard and Lafitte, settled the destination of the Drivers' Championship in this final year of the ETC. 14 points, Ravaglia ahead of Steve Soper at this stage, and Dodone dropping back to 5 points behind Soper in third place. The presentations in the FINA-sponsored RAC Tourist Trophy at Silverstone to Rouse and Alain Ferté. On the left of your picture, Ravaglia, on the right, Tiff Needell, winner of his class. A rueful look from Rudy Eggenberger as he talks to Soper. And so, as the champagne flows, a chance to congratulate Andy Rouse.
That's right, it's been a long time. I think I did my first tourist trophy back in 1973, and I've done the race most years since, so it's quite a lot of races that I've done, and today's a great day because at last we've won the TT.
The Tourist Trophy won, and Ravaglia goes round the circuit as well for congratulations on winning the European Touring Car Championship Drivers' Trophy as we go to Nogaro in France for the final round ever of the ETC. The last round in the championship, and we take a view of the man who won it. Meanwhile, Emanuele Pirro has returned from testing the Honda McLaren to drive alongside him in this last round, as Jacques Lafitte is just as anxious on a French circuit to beat both of them. For Ford, their interest is in trying to take the Manufacturers' Championship away from BMW, and Pirro is just the man to try to stop them. With this sort of battle going on in the BMW teams, one man is going to remember this race for the rest of his life. Alfred Hager, who succeeded in breaking his thumb just prior to the start of the race. In car then with BMW at the start of the final round ever of the European Touring Car Championship. And it's a pretty hefty queue on the tight circuit here at Nogaro. Contact again as they go into the first corner. But it's the Eggenberger cars dominating the race. Up into fourth place comes the Nissan, while Ulf Granberg is at the wheel of the Silver Sierra behind the BMWs there, driving in his first European Touring Car Championship race for some time. Smoke pouring out the back of a Ford here as BMW close up. Some tight fighting going on between both the Benghazi cars and the Schnitzer cars as they jockey for position. With the Drivers' Championship won, however, it's Ford who look set perhaps to take the manufacturer's crown. A repeat almost of last year, where BMW again took the World Championship for drivers, while Ford took the manufacturer's side. The Nissan this year has been developed into a race-winning combination. It's sad that we shan't see it again in the European Series in 1989. The damage that was done to Group A racing by the World Touring Car Championship has never been quite recovered. By the end of this season, it was going that way, but the threat of ProCar was too much. FISA have ruled no more international status for Group A racing. It's a sad blow to many of the smaller teams, but also to some of the manufacturers who have backed this from the start. It remains to be seen whether or not this measure is going to result in a lack of Group A cars within a couple of years' time or so to compete in the national championships. Some doubt that it will continue to be a viable proposition to major manufacturers interested in international markets. Back here at Nogaro, BMW were defending their position and trying to maintain some sort of effort to take Manufacturers' Championship as well. The Nissan was in sparkling form, trying to work his way up in and among the Fords. This is a car that has the handling, but yet lacked the complete power in its first year of development to deal with the Cosworths. Nevertheless, things were very much going that way. There was a tremendous battle between the BMWs in this final round of the championship. Grass was used, curb and everything else, as Benghazi fought it out with the Schnitzer team. Once again, a place perhaps for tactics. This is oil on the screen of the Eric van der Poel car, and he clips, in fact, the Benghazi car ahead of him in his efforts to try and see where he's going. Pit stop time for Klaus Ludwig, a strong supporter of touring car racing and sports car racing. He may yet be seen in a Porsche in 1989 as Olivier Griard tries to get his car restarted. Meanwhile, here is the Nissan, losing a place to the Ford. Brakes lock up, however, and on the inside there, the Nissan tries to find a way through again. Perhaps offline, Klaus Ludwig picks up a puncture and is yet again another pit visitor. Meanwhile, the Nissan's on the inside now of the BMW, and Alan Grice, as always, is applying a little close contact. There's no harder driver than the Australian on the Touring Car Championship circuits of the world. Apart from his Australian involvement, he now is likely to go to America to drive touring cars. Pierre Dieudonné makes his stop with the Eggenberger Ford Sierra. That, put together with the problems for Klaus Ludwig, give BMW their chance. The question is, can Emanuele Pirro in number 56 BMW put sufficient distance between himself and the Eggenberger Fords to retain that lead in the second part of what is a two-part race similar to that at Nürburgring? The Fords don't think so. It's a big, big charge by the Klaus Ludwig car. Almost disaster there as he takes the car right to the limit under braking. But it's not enough, and there's a win for Pirro and BMW in the first part of the race here at Nagaro. Pirro, Ludwig, Van der Poel, Marin, Larsen and Jabouille, the order in the top 6 here in Heat 1, as the drivers and the cars prepare for Heat 2 of the championship. The break between the two events gives an opportunity to change brake pads and things like that, while Steve Soper is getting into his spacesuit. Wyn Percy is at the wheel of the Nissan, slowed in the first part, and Soper is determined to try and do something to retain that Ford lead and snatch it back again in the overall situation. Soon, he's up and past the BMW and trying to put distance between himself and the two M3s. Meanwhile, from the back of the grid, Percy is charging on hard with the Nissan, here in and among the traffic. It's fairly obvious from the word go that, barring problems, there's no doubt about a Ford victory here, which will give them the manufacturer's title, and Soper is getting away from both the M3s. The real interest is centred on the chase of the Nissan. As the Ford goes on towards victory, all eyes are on Wyn Percy, possibly the most underrated driver in the whole of the championship. He so nearly won it with Rover in 1986, was virtually out of the game in 87, and this year has been very much a learning curve for the Japanese team. Ford have the distance and had the manufacturer's championship in their pocket, courtesy of Steve Soper here. Where will he go next year as primarily a saloon car man? The tight turns and spectacular racing see the Sierra going on towards its last international victory. Meanwhile, behind, the Nissan is closing in on Ravaglia. Leaving it right till the last moment, Percy finds a way through, in and among the traffic, to take second place behind number 1 Ford. It's a fitting end to a championship which sadly will be seen no more on the circuits of Europe. The flag goes out. What could Nissan perhaps have achieved? The overall result, Heat 2 first, Soper, Percy, Ravaglia, Hager, Chatois and Simonsen. And the composite, Ludwig and Soper, Pirro, Ravaglia, Poel, Hager, Morin, Chatois, Muller, Calderari and Volsteck and Wirth with the fastest lap to Ludwig. So as Steve Soper goes over to Rudi Eggenberger to discuss some sort of future with him, we talk and congratulate Roberto Ravaglia.
Yes, I'm very happy because I win this year the first time in 2 years that I win the championship in the circuit, and this is very good because I won the championship always during the winter. And but for me, it's really fantastic to be champion again for the third time.
And so the Manufacturers' Championship goes to Ford and the Drivers' Championship to Ravaglia. It's goodbye forever to the ETC.